Trigger warning. This podcast is about grief. Whether you are newly bereaved or whether you have been stuck in grief for years, I do hope this podcast brings you some comfort. Grief is such a universal experience, but we all do it differently. This podcast is not about fixing you or forcing the healing process, because there is no cure for grief. It can only be absorbed, experienced, loved and cared for. So whether you are doing it privately behind closed doors, or like me, you are kicking and screaming your way through, let's support each other. This is a safe space where we can come together and share experiences. My hope is that this podcast shines a light on your path and gives you the strength to navigate your way through the grieving process. My name is Louise Bates, and I'm so pleased we connected. I'm looking forward to interviewing people who have also walked this path to find out what worked for them, in the hope that it helps you too. I'm sending you so much love and support, and I look forward to sharing this crazy journey with you. Hello and welcome to this episode of A Gift for Grief. And today I am delighted to have Rob Halligan with me as my guest. Now, Rob is an award-winning singer-songwriter. He has recorded 15 albums, appeared on many TV and radio shows, and performed in every continent. Have I got everything?
Apart from Antarctica.
Okay.
I've not been there.
There's time. So welcome, Rob, and thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you for having me.
So perhaps we could start with you telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the music.
Oh, goodness. I'm a singer-songwriter. I grew up on the South Coast. A sort of potted history, I guess, is I got into a lot of trouble when I was a teenager and ended up on the run. Ended up on the streets when I was 15 and met some amazing people in the Midlands on my travels who helped me sort my life out. I got into music when I was a teenager. I had a car accident. I got a guitar while I was in hospital. My mum bought me a guitar because I was in hospital for 6 months and really bored. Oh. And so she got me a guitar and came out of hospital and got into a band when I was at school called the Freak Brothers that weren't very good. And but that's how I got into sort of doing music. And then it was a hobby right up until I was in my early 30s. That's
amazing. So without that car accident, you could have been working in a bank or doing something very different.
Yeah. Okay. Stranger things have happened.
So I know you've played all over the world and with some famous musicians. But the first time I saw you perform was a few years ago at Warwick Folk Festival. You were playing in the square. And I remember thinking, this is very different. And I loved your energy, your songs and your style. And I've seen you a few times since then. But how would you describe your music?
Oh, I don't know. Everybody asks me that. I'm not folk enough to be a folkie, I think. I don't know. It's kind of folk rock, I guess. But with all sorts of different influences, and it changes depending on what I'm listening to. I do like Paul Gambaccini said that I was like Bruce Springsteen having English tea with Billy Bragg.
Now that's pretty good. That's a good quote,
which
isn't
I
it?
quite like that quote. I mean, that was a few years ago, but so that was quite nice.
Fab. Well, I recently saw you perform at the local church, and I remember thinking, we're going to a gig in a church. That's weird. That's different. But I didn't know about your Christian connections. So to me, you were this really cool musician who wrote amazing songs, who dressed like a rock star with big cowboy boots and fancy hats. So I was intrigued about your Christian background. Have you always had faith, or were your family religious?
No. So in fact, my mum and dad had split up, and so we grew up with my mum, and she was really kind of switched off of church when we were kids. She used to take us to church, and then I think they had a new vicar in the church when I was a little kid, and me and my sister would sort of run around the church, and the previous vicar had been brilliant, a lot of fun. And this new vicar said to my mum, unless you can keep your kids under control, please don't bring them.
Oh, dear.
And so that was it. We didn't go back to church after that. And so, and like I say, I got into a lot of trouble as a teenager, a lot of trouble with the police. I was all over the place.
Okay.
And I ran away from home and ran away from the police when I was 15. Ended up in the Midlands and met some Christians who just helped me turn my life around. And it kind of, I don't know, I've never had a Damascus Road kind of thunderbolt conversion or anything. I guess that, that was nearly 40 years ago now.
Wow.
And it's a journey, so I could say, well, I've been a Christian for that many years, but actually it's a journey, and I still kind of think I'm discovering what that actually means.
Yeah. And it comes across in your songs as well. Do you feel...
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't like to put myself out as a Christian songwriter, a Christian singer. So I'm a songwriter and I'm a musician and I'm a Christian. And if my faith comes out in that, that's great. And, every now and again I will sort of intentionally write kind of songs for the church or whatever. But generally speaking, it's just songs about life. And actually part of my life is God, and, and sometimes that's a rant towards God and a bit of anger towards God, or an argument with him, or other times it's it's gratitude, and
it's about having that relationship with God.
It's all about a relationship.
Absolutely. Now, it was at this gig in the church where you talked about your dad, and I had no idea about your backstory, and you shared with the audience that your dad was tragically killed on 9/11. And that his office was on the 99th floor of the World Trade Center. And when you started talking about it at this gig, it sent chills throughout my body, because it's one of those world events that we all remember where we were on that day. And the whole world felt that tsunami of immense fear and sadness, and for the victims and the families. And I remember being glued to my telly all day watching it unfold. So before we talk about how this horrendous event has affected you, Rob, could you tell us a little bit about your dad and the relationship you had with him growing up?
Yeah, so my dad, my mum and dad split up when I was very young, probably about one. I don't remember living with my dad. I think, like all of those kind of relationships, you have this arrangement where my dad would come over on a Saturday to take us out. Except he didn't always come over, and we would be waiting for him to turn up and that kind of thing. So it was always a little bit hit and miss. He remarried, and I had two. A half brother and a half sister from that marriage, and then he divorced again and then married again, and he married an American lady and moved to America, and we would go over kind of once a year for a couple of months at a time, and either in the summer or over Christmas, sort of sort of my very young teens, that sort of time. And when I started getting into trouble, we kind of lost touch. But Dad did very well for himself. He worked in finance. He worked for an insurance company. Got a job in Wall Street. In fact, in 1993, got a job at the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
And there was an attack on the World Trade Center back in the 90s. Where there was a truck bomb in the car park underneath. And I remember him sort of telling me that, if that ever happens again, he's out there, like he's getting out like a shot, And he worked there, then he worked in Wall Street, and then he got this other job in the World Trade Center. In his, like you said, his office was on the 99th floor. He was working for Aon, big reinsurance company, and he was on the board of directors for that. So he had a good job.
Yeah.
And I've got a half brother in America as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it was after I kind of met these Christians and started to sort of turn my life around and sort myself out a bit that we got back in touch, and I started going over.
Okay.
And so yeah, we sort of kind of started repairing our relationship.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as an adult, you reconnect with your dad.
Yeah.
And then 9/11 happens. Now, most people's experience of 9/11 was watching it from afar with no personal connection to anyone involved. And a collective wave of fear and disbelief swept over the planet. But you knew your dad's office was on the 99th floor, so your experience must have been very, very different. Could you share the experience of events as they unfolded, but only as much as you feel comfortable with?
Yeah. So I was at work. I worked for I worked for Lloyd's Pharmacy in their head office. I was an HR manager, and it was a big open plan office, and suddenly the news started rippling around that something had happened. My brother phoned me and said, "Have you seen what's happened?" And so as the day kind of unfolded, news sort of came in. Didn't know if Dad was at work. He'd broken his leg, so his leg was in a cast. So he'd gone in with his. We didn't know if he'd gone in or not, and then eventually found out that he had. It took quite a while really to establish what had happened and if he was there, if he got out or not. It was a really strange thing to. I went across the road. There was a big sort of department store, and I went over the road and watched it on the TVs there. It was it was a really strange day, and it was very surreal. A lot of people have said it was like watching a movie. It was like something that wasn't real, and it really was like that.
Yeah. So when someone dies in a traumatic manner, such as through a terrorist attack, the grief experience must be very overwhelming and traumatic. So not only are you faced with the suddenness and timing of your loss, but also the horrific circumstances surrounding their death. How do you begin to cope with such a devastating loss? And what guided you through your journey of grief?
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier, and I was thinking, what was interesting about how looking back at my journey through all of that, because obviously we all have moments of grief in our life, and they're all very different. And there are other people in my life that have died, and those have been different journeys of grief. With something like 9/11, what you're kind of wrestling with, and you don't realise that you're wrestling with, is that it's a little bit like the media and the world is kind of dictating your grief.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean, because you're just trying to deal with it, and yet you have people asking you interviews, you have the news telling you stuff, all of this kind of thing. All this stuff is just being piled in on you, and it's like you just need to step away from it and just have your own personal thing, and that can be very difficult.
Yeah.
There's one thing I did that I was really glad of, and I don't know why I did it. I think the day after I went into Coventry, I went into the cathedral, the old cathedral, and I never go there. I didn't.
Yeah.
And the old cathedral, it was destroyed in the Blitz. It's just the ruins. So you've just got the walls and the tower, and in behind the altar you have this big cross, that's made of the charred timbers
Yeah.
of that were pulled out of the wreck of the cathedral, and behind that you have Father Forgive, and it's an amazing. It really is a special place. It's just a peaceful place in the middle of the city.
Yeah.
And I went there and I sat. I don't know how long I sat, but I sat there for a long time, just being quiet and just trying to. And I think for me that was, if you like, that was my space, and I
Yes.
realised then I would have to have my space and the space that I let other people into, and I had to learn, if you like, to take control of my own grief,
Yes.
and not to allow, So if I was in interviews or anything, not to. One of the things that interviewers would quite often say was, "Oh, it must have been terrible. You must have been so close to your dad, and it was awful." Well, actually, I wasn't that close to my dad. We were really working. It was awful.
Yeah.
But my relationship wasn't what people necessarily tried to bill it as,
Okay.
if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. But you were just starting to reconnect with him as
Absolutely.
an adult, so
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it was a very different,
Yeah.
there was I think the grief wasn't necessarily that I'd lost somebody that I was very close to. It was that this healing that we were knowing in our relationship had been taken away from us.
absolutely, yeah. So how do you accept the concept of forgiveness, especially after such an awful terrorist attack?
I think my journey of learning to forgive has been. I think it started at the cathedral. There was the words "Father, forgive," and my immediate reaction as a Christian, or somebody that was trying to be a Christian, was, "You've got to be kidding,"
Yeah.
But it was something that really stayed with me. There was a prayer written out. It's called the Litany of Reconciliation, and it's written out underneath the cross. And the first line of that prayer is, "The hatred that divides nation from nation, class from class, race from race, Father, forgive." And I felt like over the next few days, I was faced with a choice of whether or not what I was going to do with what had happened. There was all this stuff in the news that America was going to invade Afghanistan, all of that kind of stuff. And I was kind of, do I want that to happen? Do I think that's the right thing to happen, and all of that? So that really affected me, and that really affected how it kind of pushed me into a corner, saying, okay, do I want to hold this, or do I want to let it go? Do I want to be able to? Because I think with something like this, the opposite, if you don't forgive, you're just left with bitterness.
Yeah.
And that eats you up. And it's not that forgiveness is particularly easy. It's not that forgiveness gets rid of justice. But learning to forgive, learning to... I talk a lot about reconciliation. Reconciliation and forgiveness, I think, are very close cousins, and they both rely on understanding and stories. And so for instance, knowing the story behind each of these guys, the terrorists, why did they do that? What was their motivation? Are they really the ones to blame? Is there a bigger picture here? Where does it go? And what was interesting, as I kind of went through this whole thing of forgiveness, I realised there was all this other stuff I needed to forgive my dad. What on earth was he doing there at work? And then the bigger picture, why wasn't he around? The one time he shouldn't have been there, he was there. And why wasn't he around when I was a kid? And all of those kind of things.
Yeah.
I needed to forgive the people that I worked with, because the way that they reacted to me and dealing with all this wasn't very good. I needed to forgive myself for my missed opportunities and things that I've messed up with my, and so there was this whole, it just opened this whole thing of learning to forgive and putting yourself into each situation and each person's shoes. I needed to forgive God. I said about my song, sometimes having a rant at God. I think it's quite a healthy thing to do, because that's all part of what a relationship's about. But it's knowing the story and understanding or trying to understand, where are you coming from in doing that?
Absolutely. And all of this just complicates your grief, doesn't it? All these different aspects. But I like to think of forgiveness is about forgiving you peace of mind.
Yeah.
But I've heard you talk about how you prefer to reflect on the positives that came out of 9/11. Now, for some people, this could be a difficult perspective to consider. Could you share something positive that you feel has come out of 9/11?
I think that 9/11, I think grief in general offers you a gift. It doesn't force it on you, but it offers you a gift, because grief, particularly in the sense of bereavement, it reminds you that what we have isn't, it's going to finish.
Yeah.
And so it kind of gives you the opportunity to respond. And how are you going to respond with it? Are you going to live? Are you going to use this grief to make a difference, or are you going to get stuck in that grief and not live? And and so for me, it was very much kind of, actually, no, this is what this has done. I need to turn this around, and it's given me the motivation to turn this around and to take, all the, there's so many different aspects of 9/11. There is the culture that, for instance, the terrorists came out of. How can I speak into that and try and make a difference there? How can we look at, how do we tell each other stories? How do we put ourselves in other people's shoes? And in doing that, how do we make a difference in this world to stop, stop, some of the stuff that we see happening over and over again,
Yeah. I heard you talk on another podcast about how two mothers had to come together.
Oh, it's an amazing story.
Could you share that?
I don't know it well enough, really. But it was a story that I heard. There was a mother of somebody that, she'd lost her son in 9/11, and she made a bit of a mission to track down the mother of one of the terrorists.
Yeah.
And it was and they met, and it was this amazing meeting, because they have both lost sons through this event, and there was no blame. It was just this recognition that they both lost sons through this tragic event.
That's an incredible story, isn't it?
And it is, yeah.
So as a Christian yourself, did your faith waver at any point?
My faith is all over the place anyway, and I think that I think doubt is a really important part of faith.
Yeah.
I think if you are so convinced that you have everything worked out and everything right, I want to say this right. Sorry.
That's okay.
Having an assurance, is absolutely essential to faith. I don't think I've ever doubted the existence of God. But sometimes I get challenged at what God is all about.
Okay.
If that's the way. But I did. I think the way that I tend to sum it up is that shortly after 9/11 happened, there was all this. Okay, do I actually believe that there is a God? And I came to this point where I thought, actually, I can't not believe there is a God. Just because bad things happen, I can't believe that there's not a God. So then it was this journey of, do I think that God is good? Do I think that God is, do I think he loves us? Or do I think he's some malevolent dictator? And I can't believe that he's anything other than good. I don't understand why bad things happen all the time. I don't understand, why God perhaps doesn't intervene, or why he answers some prayers and not other prayers. I think that's a huge kind of thing. But actually, I do believe that God is good. So then, if I believe that God is good and God is love, do I believe that that goodness and that love is bigger than everything? The mess that we see in the world. Do I believe that the love of God is bigger than the hatred of man, for instance?
Yes. Yeah.
Then I do. And I think that's the journey, and that's the challenge, to discover more of, and to express and to demonstrate what that love is all about.
Absolutely. And for me, the way I see it is that this life is like a school for our souls.
Right.
To learn and to grow.
Yeah.
So whether it's God or the universe or Mother Earth, whatever it is you believe in, this higher power,
Yes.
we're here to learn from each other.
Yeah.
And to learn to forgive and to learn to love, whatever.
Yeah.
So, like you, I have a faith, and it helps, but I appreciate not all my listeners will resonate with this.
Yeah.
But hopefully, with what you're sharing today, it will help other people out there that are going through a difficult time.
Yeah.
Now, I know you lost your sister Natasha very suddenly when she was 20, and there's never a good way to lose anybody. And you lose your dad in 9/11. I can't quite find the right words for this question, but what I want to ask is, how different is the grief? Are there any comparisons?
It was very different because, so Natasha was my younger sister, and she had completely by chance moved up to not far from where I live. She was on the south coast. She moved up with a boyfriend. So we had been hanging around a lot more than we had ever done before. She was my half sister, so I didn't grow up with her in the same house. But no, we'd started hanging around a lot more. She'd started coming along to the church that I was part of, and then so for her to suddenly. It was really sudden. She died in her sleep. She had a seizure in her sleep, which was completely out of the blue. And so, because I was local, I had to organise and sort out a lot of the stuff that was going on, all the practical stuff, which incidentally I think is a really interesting part of grief. I think when you're that close to something, you go into doing the practical thing helps you cope, doesn't it?
It's a distraction, isn't it?
Yeah. And the same happened with my dad, you see. So that was interesting. I think with Natasha, I was, I was a lot younger, and I think that made that was that whole. I wasn't as, I don't know. Interesting phrase. I wasn't as acquainted with grief, as I was years later when Dad died, and so it was all very new and didn't know. And I think that was, I think in some ways that was much more of a shouting at God moment than losing my dad.
Yeah.
that was so unexplainable. And it's interesting, isn't it, that with something like 9/11, whilst you can say, well, God, why on earth did God let that happen? You can see why it happened. If you look at all the, all the people that were involved and the reasons and everything, their motives and all of that kind of stuff. With something like that, you can't see why it happened, and you think, why on earth, And
it's hard to process something that doesn't. You can't make sense of something that doesn't make sense.
No, that's right.
So how would you describe grief to someone who has never had a significant loss?
This is my experience. Grief has made my life richer because it's made me appreciate things more.
Yeah.
But it is an incredibly painful. It can be an incredibly painful experience.
Yeah.
I don't think it's something that you can always understand, or that you can ever understand, really. And it is this just. It creates a hole.
Yeah.
I think, and it's not necessarily a hole that needs filling, but it's because I think the idea of trying to replace what you've lost is kind of wrong.
Yeah.
But it also creates opportunities to create something new.
Yeah. I always like to think about it as a badly wrapped gift.
Okay.
So it's very painful, and it's this journey that you go along. And some people tend to get stuck. But for me, I'm 8 years down the road from losing our son Matthew. And I've completely changed as a person. And I have this mission now to go out and help other people that are grieving.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I feel like I'm being guided by Matthew.
Yes.
So there's the gift. For some people, they might find that hard to comprehend.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think you're working the same way with your life and helping people. And having gone through your experiences, you'll have that deeper understanding and empathy for other people. And that's another gift. So
it's interesting, because some people have said about some of the things that I do. So, some of the charity stuff that I do with the kids, the music, all of those kind of things. They talk about it as being a crutch. And actually, I'm happy with that, because, grief does leave you wounded. And, we limp along, in life afterwards, doing these things. And, it's right. It's absolutely true that it is as much for us. But yeah, like I say, it's, for me, it's about, okay, how do I use this experience, and how do you use it to try and make a better world?
Absolutely, yes, and it helps you as well in a more positive way to move forward, doesn't it? So but do you have any special ways to remember Natasha and your dad?
I think with Dad, it's probably more obvious because we're part of the 9/11 UK family support group, so we're very involved with that, and every year we all meet together.
Okay.
And the names of all the 9/11 victims, the UK victims, we meet together in London at the Memorial Garden and read out the names. My daughter's actually now she's on the committee that looks after the garden, which is really, that really blesses me.
That's a good connection.
Because she didn't really know my dad, so for her to be to take that on is really important. I think for me, I write songs.
Yeah.
And so there are songs about my dad, there are songs about Natasha. I think I can honestly say that I probably think about my dad every day.
So I know you are a Christian. So what are your thoughts about the afterlife?
I don't know. I don't know. I think the best way that I can sum it up is that as a Christian, so there is part of faith that is a risk, and you believe because, you can't prove anything. It is just you've chosen to believe something.
Yeah.
You've chosen to believe. And that's very much it. It's a choice. But there is another part of faith, I think, for me anyway, where whilst I can't explain or prove anything, I know that I have felt the love of God.
Yeah.
I know that I have experienced something that I can't really explain or put my finger on, but it is something beautiful, something that has held me, something that has kept me. And for me, we joke about, me and my wife joke about heaven. She's going to she's going to be able to fly.
Okay.
That's her idea of heaven.
Yeah.
Be able to fly. My idea of heaven is there will be curry and licorice everywhere. Because that's. But actually, if in all seriousness, for me, it is an eternity knowing that love.
Yes.
That I just kind of get a glimpse of now.
Yeah.
That for me is what the afterlife is about.
Yeah.
That to me what heaven is about. I think I don't know. I talk about talk about going to heaven, don't you? And I sometimes think, well, if that's how it is, I think we might be surprised at who we see there.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know.
Okay. So do you believe our loved ones can give us signs?
I don't know. I mean, I've there has been times when I've sort of talked to my dad.
Yeah.
I've had a go at him. But yeah, and there's other times when I've been going through stuff where I think, why aren't
Yeah.
what would you do? And I wouldn't say I've ever had sort of like
Haven't had a direct
sign,
message.
No, yeah. But yeah.
But just knowing that you feel the love of God,
but there,
you feel that.
I think so, and I think that it's not so much a sign, but it's a connection,
Yeah.
and you still have this connection with because I don't believe that this life is all there is. I do believe that the love that we have for each other continues.
Yes.
And so there is always that connection.
Yeah.
And it is something that isn't always explainable, but it's incredibly precious.
I like that. Now, if you could give Natasha and your dad a message, what would you say?
Well, that's an interesting one. I think it would be thank you.
Oh.
Because they are, they're very much still part of my life.
Yes.
And I think, particularly with my dad, there were things that he did in his life that I never really understood until I'd gone through life myself.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, to be able to say, I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Well, Rob, thank you so much for being my guest today. Thank you for being brave and open and for sharing your story. There's so much more we could have talked about. We didn't even get to mention the charity Global Care, this Christian organisation which you support. So for people who want to know more about you, how can they find out? You've got a website.
Yeah, I have a website at robhalligan.co.uk.
Yeah.
So, most of the information, all my musical videos and links to the charity and what I do, it's all on there.
That's brilliant. So, listeners, get on that website, check out Rob's 15 albums and his upcoming gigs. I highly recommend you go to one of his gigs. He has a fab voice. He is an amazing musician and you will be entertained. So, Rob, thank you so much. As you are a songwriter, Rob, I think it's only right that we finish off with one of your songs. So would you like to introduce the song that you've chosen?
Yeah, I chose a song, "Nothing Good Is Wasted," and I think that's what's really, for me, that's something that has been a really important lesson that I've learned, that we go through good things and we go through bad things. I don't think any of it is wasted. I think it is all part of the rich tapestry of life that includes grief, that includes pain, but it also includes healing and the opportunities to make a better world.
I love that. And that's a perfect place to end our podcast. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Where does the rainbow go when its promise is fulfilled? Where does the great wave fall when its ocean depths are stilled? There is a place I know where things of beauty go, 'cause nothing good is wasted, nothing good is lost, nothing is worth nothing when it's given at a cost. Nothing good is wasted, nothing good is lost. Where does the sweet song go when the music fades, or the smile of innocence when it comes of age? 'Cause nothing good is wasted, nothing good is lost, nothing is worth nothing when it's given at a cost. Nothing good is wasted, nothing good is lost. And beyond this journey's road are treasures worth more than gold. There is a place I know where does the friendship go when we move on? Good intentions fall away and life goes wrong. 'Cause nothing good is wasted, nothing good is lost, nothing is worth nothing when it's given at a cost.
Thank you for listening to this episode of A Gift for Grief. Please feel free to share it with your friends and family, and let's encourage others to become more grief literate. If you're struggling with your grief or worried about your mental health, please do speak to your doctor. If you would like to join me on my social media groups, check out the show notes for all the links, and I look forward to connecting with you next time. The music on this podcast was written and recorded by Matthew Bates and can be found on his 2 albums, Fight Back and Kaleidoscope.